Welcome back to This is Thailand. If you've been here before, you know what we do. We sit down with people who came to this country looking for something, a fresh start, a bit of warmth, someone to share a meal with, and we let them tell you what actually happened. Some of them lost money. Some of them lost more than that. And some of them, the ones whose stories stay with you, lost something they can't quite put a name to. Today's story is one of those. His name is Brendan. He's 63 years old, from Limerick in Ireland. He spent his working life as a plumber, ran his own outfit for 25 years, built something solid from nothing, the way tradesmen do. By any measure, he was a man who had his life sorted. And then, in the space of one phone call on an ordinary Tuesday, he didn't. What Brendan did next brought him to Thailand. And what happened to him in Thailand is what he's here to tell you. I want to say one thing before I hand over to him. This isn't a story about a stupid man. Brendan is not stupid. This is a story about a lonely man, and in my experience, loneliness is a far more expensive condition than stupidity ever was. This is his story, in his own words. Right, where do I start? I suppose I start with the pipes. 35 years I spent in other people's walls, under their floors, behind their kitchen units in houses that smelled of someone else's cooking and someone else's life. You get to know a lot about how people live when you're the fella who fixes things they can't see. The pipes that carry the water, the joints that hold everything together. You do the job right and nobody notices. That's the whole point. You do it wrong and the ceiling comes down. I liked that, the invisibility of it. You fix the thing, it works, you move on. I set up on my own when I was 38, called it O'Brien Plumbing, which sounds grander than it was. It was me, and eventually 3 lads in a van with a slow puncture that I kept meaning to sort out. We did domestic mostly. Limerick and the surrounding areas. Nothing spectacular, but steady. You build a reputation over 25 years, and the phone keeps ringing. That's enough. The house was on the Ennis Road. 3 bedrooms. A garden that I kept meaning to do something with but never did. Bought it in 1994 for a price that seems almost insulting now. Marie, that was my wife, she did something with the front, put in flower beds, made it look like people actually lived there rather than just stored themselves overnight, which I suppose is what I was doing half the time. Working, not coming home. Working again. 31 years we were married. I'm not going to dress that up as something it wasn't, and I'm not going to dress that up as something it was either. It was a marriage. There were good years and difficult years and years that were just years, if you know what I mean. Years where you're both so busy living the logistics of a life together that you forget to check whether the thing underneath is still holding. I think that's what happened. I think the thing underneath stopped holding, and neither of us said anything about it, and then Marie met a man at her sister's wedding, a solicitor from Galway, very presentable apparently, drives one of those big gray German cars, and that was that. My daughter rang me on a Tuesday evening. I was eating beans on toast, which tells you something about where I was at. She told me in that very careful way she has, choosing each word like she was diffusing something. I listened. I said I appreciated her telling me. I put the phone down. I sat there for a while. The beans went cold. I'm not going to tell you I handled it well, because I didn't. I didn't handle it badly either, I don't think. I just sort of went quiet for a while, internally. Kept going to work because what else do you do? Kept fixing things. Came home to an empty house and heated things up and went to bed. 6 weeks I barely ate. I know that, because my trousers stopped fitting, and that's what made me notice. The divorce took the better part of a year. I'm not going to get into the details because they're dull, and they're mine. What I'll tell you is that we sold the house on the Ennis Road and split it down the middle, and I ended up with $555,000 in an account that felt like it belonged to someone else, which, in a way, it did. It belonged to the version of me that had been married 31 years and lived on the Ennis Road and had flower beds at the front that his wife planted. That version got dissolved in a solicitor's office on a Wednesday afternoon, and this money was all that was left of him. I'd never had money like that sitting still before. It made me uncomfortable. Money's supposed to move. Into the mortgage, into the business, into the school shoes and the car insurance and the 1,000 small costs of a life in motion. Money sitting still is just evidence that your life has stopped. My mate, Donald, suggested Spain. He'd been to Malaga twice and never shut up about it. My brother Seamus said Florida, he has a cousin there, kept going on about the weather and the Gulf. And I sat there nodding at all of it and thinking, no, I don't want somewhere that reminds me of holidays. I don't want somewhere I've been before, even in my imagination. I don't know exactly when I found the Thailand videos. Sometime around 2 in the morning, which is when you make your best and worst decisions. I'd been down some rabbit hole, cost of living abroad, places to retire. The usual search history of a man who's trying to imagine a future he can't yet picture. And there it was. Thailand. The temples and the food markets and the green hills up north and the coast down south. These fellas on YouTube talking about how far your money goes, how warm it is, how the food costs nothing and tastes of everything. One comment, from some man whose username I can't remember, said it was the only place he'd ever felt properly alive. Which is a mad thing to write in a YouTube comment. But at 2 in the morning in a rented flat in Limerick with 55,000 sitting still in your account, it lands differently than it should. I booked 3 weeks in Bangkok. Told myself it was just to clear my head. And I believed that. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I genuinely believed it. I wasn't running away. I was just going somewhere different for a bit. 3 weeks. See the temples. Come home. That was the plan. I'm here talking to you now, which should tell you how the plan went. I landed at Suvarnabhumi on a Thursday morning in November. 6 in the morning, half asleep, and the second I walked out of the terminal, the heat just hit me. Not like a warm day in Limerick, like Malaga on a good afternoon. Something heavier than that. Something that gets into your clothes and your lungs and says, right, different rules here. I stood there with my bag for a moment, 63 years old, on my own in Bangkok. And I thought, well, here we are then. I booked a hotel on Sukhumvit, somewhere between Asoke and Nana, mid-range, nothing fancy. Clean enough. The kind of place where the breakfast is included, but you wouldn't write home about it. I spent the first day just walking. That's what I do when I'm somewhere new. I walk until I understand the shape of a place. Bangkok doesn't really let you understand its shape. It's too big, too loud, too layered. There's a gold temple on one street and a 7-Eleven on the next, and a whole covered market in between, and motorbikes weaving through all of it like they're threading a needle at 40 kilometers an hour. The smell is something. Exhaust fumes and frangipani and something frying in oil that I never quite identified but ate 3 portions of anyway. I liked it immediately. That surprised me. I'd half expected to be overwhelmed, to want to go home after 2 days. But there was something about the anonymity of it. Nobody in Bangkok knew I was the fellow whose wife left him for a solicitor from Galway. Nobody knew about the house on the Ennis Road or the flower beds or the Tuesday phone call. I was just a tall Irishman in a city of 10 million people, and that felt, for the first time in over a year, like breathing room. I did the tourist things. Went to Wat Pho, the one with the giant reclining Buddha, the size of a house, all gold, the kind of thing that makes you feel very small and not entirely unhappy about it. Took the BTS to the river. Ate pad thai from a street stall near Khao San Road and burned my mouth because I hadn't learned yet that when they ask if you want it spicy and you say yes, they mean something different than what you mean. I was in a sports bar on Sukhumvit on maybe my 4th evening, one of those places with 6 screens and pool tables and an English language menu. Drinking a Chang, large bottle, ice cold, which becomes your religion very quickly in that heat, when a fella sat down next to me, Manchester accent, broad as a barn door. Dave, he said his name was. Plasterer. Dave, he said his name was. Plasterer. He'd been coming to Thailand for 11 years this trip and twice a year before it for a decade. He knew the place the way I know. Copper pipe, every joint, every junction, every place things are likely to go wrong. We talked for a couple of hours. He was a perfectly decent fella, not trying to sell me anything, not steering me anywhere, just talking the way people do when they're abroad and meet someone who speaks the same language. He talked about Bangkok, about Chiang Mai up north, about the islands. And then he mentioned Pattaya, about Chiang Mai up north, about the islands. I'd heard of it, obviously. You don't spend 3 weeks on YouTube watching Thailand content without coming across Pattaya. I had a fair idea what it was, and I said something along those lines that it seemed a bit, not really my scene. And Dave shrugged and said, well, it's not everyone's, but it's not what people think either. Worth seeing once. Go for a couple of nights, have a look, make up your own mind. That was it, no hard sell. He went back to his beer. I went back to mine. I sat on it for 2 days. Then I took the bus south. The bus from Bangkok to Pattaya takes about 2 hours depending on traffic and costs almost nothing. I think it was 130. About €3. You get on at the Eastern Bus Terminal on Ekamai, and you watch Bangkok gradually thin out, and then you're in flat green country, and then you're pulling into a bus station, and suddenly you're there. Pattaya. Right. I'm not going to pretend I was shocked. I knew what walking street was before I arrived. I'd seen the videos, but knowing a thing and standing in it are different. The noise hits you first, music from every bar bleeding into every other bar's music until it's just one continuous wall of sound. Then the lights. Then the sheer number of people on the street at 11 at night on a Tuesday. Then you notice the composition of the crowd, and you understand very quickly the basic economics of the place. I want to be honest here because I think it matters. I was not a naive man walking into this. I was a 63-year-old widower, not a widower. Divorced. I keep doing that. A 63-year-old divorced. I keep doing that. A 63-year-old divorced man who knew perfectly well what Pattaya was for. I'm not going to claim otherwise. The first 2 nights I had a few beers, watched the world go by, and went back to my guest house on 2nd Road. I'm not sure what I was waiting for. Maybe I was just getting my bearings. Maybe I was testing myself to see what I actually wanted. The 3rd night, I walked down to a beer bar on Soil K Metro, smaller than Walking Street, less chaotic, the kind of place where you can actually hear yourself think. There was a row of bar stools along the front, and I sat down and ordered a Leo, and after a bit, a woman sat down on the stool beside me and said, in perfectly good English, "You look like you're trying to figure something out." Her name was Nok. She was 34. She was from Udon Thani, up in the northeast, Aizan country. She'd been working in Pattaya for 3 years. She told me this without any particular drama, just as a fact, the way you'd tell someone what your job was anywhere else. She had a daughter back home, 8 years old, living with her parents. She sent money back every month. She said she didn't love this life, but she didn't know how to leave it. She wasn't the youngest woman there. She wasn't the most immediately striking. But she spoke to me like a person speaks to another person, and she laughed when I said something that was actually funny rather than just being polite about it, and she asked me where in Ireland I was from, and then asked what Limerick was like, and I found myself actually telling her. I think about that now, the way she asked. It seems so genuine. And maybe I'll come back to this. Maybe it was. I wasn't looking for a person to fix. I want to be clear about that too. But there's something about someone telling you honestly about a hard life, about sacrifice, about keeping things together for a child you're not even with. Something in me that spent 35 years solving problems just quietly stands up and pays attention. I should probably have noticed that happening. At the time, I didn't. The bar fine was 500. About 13. I remember thinking that was almost nothing, less than a round of drinks in Limerick, which is, I suppose, exactly the kind of thinking that gets a man into trouble. I paid it to the mama-san, a compact woman who smiled at me with the professional warmth of someone who has seen everything twice, and Nok and I walked out into the Pattaya night. We got some tam and sticky rice from a cart on the road behind Soil K, sat on plastic stools while the motorbikes went past, and she told me more about her daughter. Her name was Mint. 8 years old, liked drawing, wanted to be a teacher. Nok showed me a photo on her phone, a serious little face, school uniform, standing very straight. I went back the next night, and the night after that. By the end of the first week, I'd paid that bar fine every evening without really thinking about it much. 7 nights, .3,000 total, less than €100, the kind of money that disappears and you don't notice. On day 10, she moved into my guest house room on 2nd Road. This was, and I want to be careful how I say this felt like a different thing, not a transaction anymore, a choice. Hers and mine. She stopped going to the bar. A choice. Hers and mine. She stopped going to the bar. I told myself we were past the formal arrangement of it, that something had shifted into something more genuine. And maybe it had. I'm still not entirely sure. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people. My 3 weeks ended on a Thursday. I booked another 2 weeks at the same guest house. My brother Seamus sent me a text. "When are you home?" I typed back, "Another week or so," and put the phone in my pocket. That became, as I said, a pattern. After about a month, we had what I'll call a practical conversation. Nok explained, very reasonably, that she couldn't work at the bar and be with me at the same time. That was the choice. Either she went back to the bar, or I helped cover what she'd been earning. She wasn't aggressive about it. She wasn't crying or threatening anything. She just laid it out the way you'd explain a scheduling problem. She needed $15,000 a month, about $400 to cover her costs and keep sending money home to her parents and Mint. I did the maths in my head the way I always do with costs. €400 a month. Back home, that was what I used to spend on diesel for the work van, easy. It was less than my monthly mortgage repayment had been on the Ennis Road. And in exchange, she wasn't going back to the bar. I said yes. I know how that sounds. I knew how it sounded at the time, if I'm honest. But I'd spent 35 years paying for things, in exchange for things. That's just commerce. What I told myself was that this was different because she was different, because the money was going to a real family with a real child. Because in $15,000 a month in Pattaya is not a fortune, but it changes the shape of someone's life. That's what I told myself. And the telling worked because part of it was true. She kept her phone close, always face down on the table, or in her pocket, or on the nightstand screen side down. I noticed it. I filed it under, she's a woman who values her privacy. I've known women like that, I told myself, means nothing. It means something. I know that now. At the time I decided not to know it. About 6 weeks in, she mentioned that her daughter's school fees were coming due. 45,000, roughly 100-200. She mentioned it carefully, not as a demand, more as a problem she was thinking about aloud. I asked how much and she told me, and I did the maths again. €1,200. I'd spent more than that replacing a boiler in a semi-detached in Raheen the previous spring. I wired it the next morning through a Western Union at the 7-Eleven on Beach Road. She sent me a photo of the receipt from her parents. I didn't ask to verify it. It didn't occur to me to wonder whether I should. Here's the thing I want you to understand, because I think it's the part that gets lost when people tell these stories. I wasn't being manipulated into something against my will. I was participating, enthusiastically. Because being needed felt better than anything I'd felt in 2 years, and I'd found something that delivered that feeling reliably, and I was prepared to pay for the ongoing supply of it. That feeling, that's the most dangerous thing in Thailand. Not the bars. Not the bar fines, not the women. That feeling of being the person someone turns to. Being the fella who sorts it. After a year of not mattering much to anyone, of rattling around a rented flat in Limerick, feeling like furniture that used to belong to a different house, being needed again was extraordinary. I can't describe it any other way. It was also, in hindsight, where I stopped thinking clearly. Because once you've identified something as the thing you need, you start protecting your access to it rather than evaluating whether it's real. You start making decisions to preserve the feeling rather than test it. I should have tested it. I didn't. By the time the school fees went through, I'd been in Pattaya for nearly 2 months. I'd stopped describing it to myself as a holiday. I'd stopped saying another week or so to Seamus. I'd moved to a slightly better room, $12,000 a month, about 37.10, up from the guest house, and Nock was spending most nights there. We'd fallen into routines. Morning coffee from the cart on Second Road. She'd cook sometimes, sticky rice, some larb. She made so spicy it took a week off my life expectancy. She thought that was very funny. In the evenings we'd walk along Jomtien Beach when it was cooler, and she'd correct my terrible attempts at Thai, and I'd tell her about Limerick, and she'd listen and ask questions. It felt, I'll say it plainly, like a life. Which is the whole problem, isn't it? Her mother got sick in month 4. Nock told me on a Tuesday evening. We were sitting outside a little place on Swabwakal that did cow pad and cold Leo, a place we'd started going to regularly enough that the woman who ran it just brought the beers without being asked. Nock had been quiet for a couple of days, not dramatically quiet, just the way someone is when they're carrying something they haven't decided how to say yet. And then she said it. Her mother was in hospital in Kankain. Something with her heart. The doctors wanted to keep her in for observation, run more tests. It was going to be expensive. I said I'd go with her. She looked at me for a moment when I said that. I don't know what she'd expected. The money, maybe, handed over at the 7-Eleven the next morning, and a phone call to report back on the outcome. That was probably the more usual arrangement, but I said I'd go, and she nodded and said okay, and that was that. We flew up from Utapahal the next morning on a small propeller thing that shook the whole way, landed at Khao Ken, and took a taxi to the hospital. This was my first time outside the Bangkok, Pattaya corridor. The country changed as we came in from the airport, flatter, drier, the road lined with cassava fields and the occasional spirit house bright with fresh flowers and orange cloth. Different Thailand to the one I'd been living in. Quieter, more tired looking, more real, in some way I found hard to name. The hospital was a provincial government place, functional and overcrowded in the way public hospitals everywhere are overcrowded. We found her mother in a ward with 6 beds. Small woman, thin, with Nock's eyes, and the particular dignity of someone who has been working hard their whole life and doesn't know how to stop even when lying in a hospital bed. She reached up and took my hand when Nock introduced me and said something in Thai that Nock translated as, "He has kind eyes." I'm not going to pretend that didn't get to me. It got to me. The father was there too, sitting in the corner chair. He didn't say much. He shook my hand and nodded and looked at me with the careful, measuring look of a man who has learned not to trust things until they prove themselves. The sister Juan was there as well, early 20s, better English than she let on initially, watching me with a steadiness that I now understand meant something different than I thought it meant at the time. I thought it meant, she's deciding whether to trust me. Maybe that's what it did mean. But there was something else in it too. Something that looked, in retrospect, like she was making a mental note. The hospital bill was 80,000, about 2,100. I paid it at the desk on the way out. The woman behind the counter didn't even blink. She'd seen Farang pay hospital bills before. It was not, by any measure, an enormous sum of money. To that family, in that province, it was months of income. I paid it because I could, because the alternative was watching an old woman worry about how her medical care was going to be covered while her heart was giving her trouble, and I'm not capable of doing that. That's not heroism. That's just how I'm built. I think about the fact that someone else should have paid that bill. I didn't know that yet. On the drive back to the airport, the landscape was all flat paddy fields going golden in the late afternoon, and Nok fell asleep against my shoulder somewhere past a town called Chum Phai. The taxi driver had a small Buddha on the dashboard with a garland of yellow flowers around it, and a Thai pop song playing very low on the radio. And outside the window, this completely foreign country was just going about its business the way countries do. And for a few minutes I felt, I want to be precise about this, not happy exactly, but useful. Like I was in the right place, doing the right thing, for someone who needed it. I almost said something to her. While she was sleeping, something about the future, about what this could be, about whether she'd ever considered coming back to Ireland for a visit at least. I had it half formed in my head. And then I didn't say it. I looked out the window at the paddy fields instead. Good thing, probably. That sentence would have cost me more than the hospital bill. The house conversation started about 2 weeks after we got back to Pattaya, not as a demand. I want to be clear about that. Nok mentioned it the way you'd mention a problem you've been circling. Her father was getting older. Her parents had rented their whole lives, same landlord for 20 years, but nothing guaranteed, nothing theirs. Her father wanted to die in a house that belonged to the family. A very straightforward human thing to want. I asked what a house would cost. She said she'd ask around. A week later, she came back with a figure. $650,000 for a simple 2-room place on the edge of their village. Concrete construction, decent land, close to the family they'd always lived near. $650,000 bought. I sat with it for a moment and converted it in my head the way I'd been automatically converting baht to euro for 4 months by then. 17,000 euro. In Ireland, that is not a house. Ireland, that is a second-hand car, or a bathroom renovation, or, and this is the comparison that I kept coming back to, about a third of what I charged a developer in Castle Troy for a commercial fit-out 3 years ago. 17,000 euro is what I once spent on copper fit-out 3 years ago. 17,000 euro is what I once spent on core fittings. A father dying in his own place rather than rented ground. I rang Dave, the Mancunian plasterer. We'd stayed in touch over WhatsApp, and told him what I was thinking. There was a silence on the phone that went on slightly longer than comfortable. Then he said, "Just be careful, mate. Land here can't go in your name. You know that, yeah?" I did know that. I'd read enough on the forums by then to understand the basics. Foreigners can't own land in Thailand. Whatever got built would be a Knox family name, not mine. Not even hers, technically, until her father registered it. I had no legal claim on any of it. I told Dave I understood that. I told him I was doing it for them, not for me, that the ownership wasn't the point. He said, yeah, okay, and we talked about something else and hung up. I think about that phone call sometimes. The pause before he spoke. I knew what was in that pause. I filled it in with my own explanations and moved on. The money went through in 2 tranches over the following 3 weeks. 35,000 first. Then the remaining 30,000 when the land was registered. Nok sent me photos of the registration document. I couldn't read a word of it. Her father's name was at the top. That was month 5, running total at that point, the monthly allowance over 4 months, the school fees, the hospital bill, the house. I did the numbers one evening in the room on 2nd Road while Nok was in the shower. I moved about 28,000 out of the settlement account. Out of 15,500, not catastrophic. I was still well clear of the water. I closed the banking app and put my phone down. I was, as I said, very good at not sitting still. The house took about 6 weeks to build. Concrete block construction, which is how they do it up in Isan, quick and practical and built for that climate rather than ours. Nok sent me photos at each stage online. Foundation pour. Walls going up. Roof on. I'd look at them the way I'd look at any construction job, checking the angles, checking the joins, noting where I'd have done something slightly differently. The block work was decent enough. The roof pitch was a bit shallow for my liking, but that's a style thing, not a structural issue. I didn't say any of this to Nok. I had to go back to Ireland in month 5 for a visa run. The Irish passport gives you 30 days on arrival in Thailand, which sounds reasonable until you've been living there 5 months and realize you're doing these trips every time like a dog tied to a post of a certain length. I flew into Dublin, spent 10 days in Limerick, turned around and went back. My daughter Ciara met me for coffee at a place near the university. She's a careful person, Ciara. Chooses her words the way I'd choose fittings. Nothing unnecessary, nothing that doesn't do a job. She asked about Thailand. I could see her deciding how much to say. She asked if I was happy. I said I was. She nodded slowly in the way that means she has more thoughts on the matter that she's decided not to share. I told her I was grand. I went back to Pattaya and we drove up to see the house. Knock's parents were already in, her mother moving around the kitchen slowly but steadily, recovering well. Her father had planted something in the small yard out front, some vegetable I couldn't name. He showed it to me with a proprietary pride that was very recognizable. A man in his own garden, his own land. I understood that completely. And this, I want to say this clearly, this part was real. The gratitude was real. The poverty that made it significant was real. A man having a garden of his own for the first time in his 60s is not nothing. I don't regret that part one, regret the context, but not the thing itself. What I'm about to describe is the part that's harder to talk about, because it requires me to admit that I knew something was wrong, and I kept going anyway. The phone was always face down. I mentioned this before. But in month 6 it escalated, not dramatically, just enough. She'd take it to the bathroom. She'd take it to the bathroom. She'd step outside to answer calls and come back saying it was her cousin or her friend from Udon, or once memorably a wrong number that seemed to require quite a long conversation. I registered each of these. I filed them away somewhere I didn't go. In month 6, she went to visit her cousin for a night. That was the story. She was back the next morning, cheerful, brought me mango from a market somewhere. I didn't ask which cousin. She had several. I knew their names. The names were real. The family was real. The names were real. The family was real. And maybe the cousin was real too, that particular night. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that I sat alone in that room on Second Road and looked at the Jomtien beachfront out the window and had to think about what I was doing. And then I didn't think about it anymore. I went out and got khao man gai from the place on the corner and watched football on my phone and went to sleep. There was one argument, our first proper one, about 6.5 months in. Something trivial started it. I can't even remember what. But it came around to trust. And she got upset in that way that Thai women sometimes do, where the upset is very visible and very total. And she said, "Why you not trust me?" And I said, "I do trust you." And she cried a bit and I backed down. I think about that conversation more than any other one. I backed down not because she'd convinced me of anything. I backed down because I knew that if I kept going, if I pushed it, if I said the thing I was actually thinking, then this ends. And I was not ready for it to end. Even if I could feel it wasn't right. Even if some part of me already knew what it was. I chose the feeling over the truth. That's the most honest way I can put it. There was one other moment. I was getting something from the top of the wardrobe one afternoon, and I knocked her phone off the nightstand. It landed face up and lit up with a line notification. A name I didn't recognize. Not Juan, not anyone in her family contacts she'd shown me. Not a name I knew. Just a name. The message preview was in Thai, so I couldn't read it. The name was there for maybe 2 seconds before the screen went dark. I put the phone back on the nightstand, then I went for a walk on Jomtien Beach. It was late afternoon, that time when the light goes orange and the bot buses go rattling along the road and the vendors are packing up their beach chairs. I walked for about an hour. There were monks in orange robes walking along the path and a group of Russian tourists taking photographs and a dog sleeping in a patch of shade like nothing in the world mattered. I thought about the name on the phone. I thought about the cousin visit. I thought about the phone always being face down. I assembled the pattern the way you assemble a diagnosis. This joint here, this joint there. This is why the pressure's dropping. This is where the leak is. And then I walked back and we had dinner, and I didn't say anything. By month 7, I transferred a total of about 32,000. That's 6 months of allowance at 9,400 each. The school fees, the hospital, the house, plus various smaller things. A fridge for the family house, a few grocery transfers. Once she asked for 8,000 to help Juan with a motorbike repair that I sent without asking much about, 32,000 euro. About a fifth of what I'd started with. Not ruinous. Not even close to ruinous technically. But it was the 7th month when I went back to Ireland for another visa run, and it was in that rented flat in Limerick that everything caught up with me. I was back in Limerick 2 weeks. Staying in the flat I'd been renting since the house sold. Ground floor on Mulgrave Street, 1 bedroom, a kitchen that looked out onto a wall, the kind of place that was fine for a base but not meant to be lived in. I'd been treating it that way, moving through it quickly, not settling. which I suppose is how I'd been treating most things for a while. I had a bit of subcontracting work lined up while I was home. A fella I'd known for years, runs a bigger outfit now, needed someone reliable for a few days on a commercial job out in the Raheen Business Park. I went, showed up at 7, did the work, came back to the flat in the evenings, watched television, rang knock once or twice. She sounded fine, slightly distant in the way she sometimes was when I was away. Not cold, just reduced, like a radio signal dropping off. I didn't think much of it. Or I told myself I didn't. The message from Wayne came on a Wednesday evening. I just got back from the job, boots still on, standing in the kitchen making tea. The line notification came up and I saw the name, Wayne. And I remember thinking she'd probably just be asking about Knock's birthday or something. Knock's birthday was coming up. I'd been thinking about what to send. I sat down at the kitchen table to read it. I'm going to try to give you the message as close to how it was as I can, because the way it was written matters. It wasn't careful, effortful English, the kind where you can tell each sentence was constructed slowly, word by word, checked and rechecked. There were small errors throughout, some missing articles, an odd tense here and there, but the meaning was completely clear. She said she was sorry to send this message. She said she hoped I would not be too angry with her. She said she liked me, and that her family liked me, and that I had been very good to her family. And then she said that she thought I should know that Knock had a Thai boyfriend, a man she had known for 3 years. He was from Pattaya originally. He drove trucks now. They had been on and off the whole time Knock had been working there. She said he had been staying at the house in the village, the house I had built, on the nights I was away. She said she was sorry again at the end. She said she had thought about sending this message for a long time. I put my phone down on the table, then I picked it up again and read it again. Then I put it down again. I made the tea, which I'd forgotten about. I drank it standing at the sink looking at the wall outside the window, which had a crack running up the left side that I'd noticed when I moved in and thought about fixing about 6 times and never had. I didn't ring Nook. I didn't ring anyone. I went to work the next morning, showed up at 7, did the job. There was a section of pipework that needed rerouting through a difficult angle, and I spent most of the morning on that and didn't think about Thailand at all, or at least that's what I told myself. In the afternoon, there was a compression fitting that kept weeping no matter what I did, and I replaced it twice before I found the fault, a hairline crack in the coupling you could barely see. Fixed it, moved on. I went back to the flat and read Juan's message again. 4 days I did this. 4 days of work and evenings and the message waiting on my phone. I'm not sure what I was waiting for. Permission, maybe. The right state of mind. Some confidence that I wouldn't say something I'd regret, not because I was worried about her feelings, but because I wanted to be steady when I asked the question. I'm the kind of man who needs to sit with a thing before he can pick it up properly. Always have been. My brother Seamus will ring you back the same day. I might ring you back on Sunday. I rang Knock on a Sunday morning, which I realize is on the nose. But that's genuinely when I did it, 9 in the morning. Limerick time, 3 in the afternoon in Thailand. She answered quickly. I told her I'd had a message from Wan. I said Wan had told me there was a Thai man, that there had been a Thai man for 3 years, that he'd been in the house. I said I wasn't shouting. I just wanted to know, was it true? She was quiet for a moment. Then she cried. Not performance crying, I don't think, though what do I know at this point about the difference? Just crying. And then she said yes. She said she was sorry. She said she did have feelings for me, that they were real, that I had been genuinely good to her and to her family, and she knew what she'd done wasn't right. And then she said this, that he was her own people, her language, her life, someone she'd known since before Pattaya, that she'd never promised me forever. And then she said it again, quietly, almost to herself. I never say forever. You say forever. I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. I'm still sitting with it, in a way. She was right, technically. I had been the one making the promises, mostly to myself, mostly silent. She'd never said the word future to me, not directly, not as a guarantee. I had assembled a future out of the routines we had, and the feeling I needed, and the idea that she was out of that life. I built the whole thing the way you build something in your head before the plans are drawn, with optimism and assumptions, and not enough regard for what's actually holding it up. The accounting was simple. 32,000 gone. A house in Khon Kaen province that belongs to another man's father, that another man had been sleeping in while I sent the monthly transfer from Mulgrave Street. 7 months. The least lonely 7 months since the Tuesday my daughter rang. That last part is the one that stays with me. Not the money. The months. I didn't fall apart. I want to say that first because I think people expect it. The dramatic collapse, the drinking, the crisis. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to explain. I went back to work. I rang Kiara more often. I stopped watching YouTube videos about Thailand at 2 in the morning and started going to bed at a reasonable hour. These are small things. They're also, I think, the real things. I didn't contact Knock again. There was nothing to say that would have changed the accounting, and I'm not a man who argues with arithmetic. The money was gone. The house was gone. Both of those were finished the moment I put the phone down on that Sunday morning, and they were going to stay finished regardless of what I said next. I thought about ringing Juan to say thank you or something like it. I never did. I don't know exactly why. Maybe because thanking her felt like it would make the whole thing more official than I was ready for. Or maybe I just didn't know what you say to a young woman who did a decent thing at some cost to herself and her family's internal peace. I hope she's all right. I think about her occasionally. The question of anger. People ask about this when I tell the story. Are you angry? And I have to be careful about how I answer because the honest answer is complicated. I'm not angry at Thailand. The country didn't do anything to me. The country didn't do anything to me. I went there in a particular condition and made a series of decisions, and the decisions had consequences. That's not Thailand's fault. I'm not angry at Nak in the way that feels clean and satisfying. I've tried that version, and it doesn't hold together. She had a boyfriend before I arrived, and she had one while I was there, and she'll probably have a complicated situation for as long as she's working in Pattaya, because that's the reality of that life. I knew what she was when I met her. I chose to believe that knowing it changed it. That's on me. Who I'm angry at, and this is the useful anger, this is the kind you can actually do something with, is the version of me that needed so badly to be needed that he kept looking away. The fella who saw the phone face down and filed it. Who backed down from the argument. Who went for a walk on the beach instead of asking the question. That man I can actually be annoyed at, and I am, and the annoyance serves a purpose. It means I don't make the same decisions again. About a year after all this, I went back to Thailand. Chiang Mai, not Pattaya. 2 weeks. I stayed in a small guest house in the old city, near the moat, the kind of neighborhood where the temple bells wake you at 6 in the morning and there are monks collecting alms in the street, and the whole place feels about 800 years old and in no particular hurry. I ate khao swa for breakfast, which is a curry noodle thing they do up north and which is one of the best things I've ever put in my mouth. I visited temples. I walked. I did not go south. I sat in a cafe on Niman Road one afternoon, one of those places with good coffee and a slow ceiling fan and Wi-Fi, and I thought about whether I hated Thailand, and I found that I didn't, which surprised me. You'd think you'd hate a place that cost you $32,000 in 7 months and a fair bit of your self-respect. But it wasn't the place that did it. The place was just the place, hot and loud and beautiful and complicated and completely indifferent to what I did with my time there. I'm back in Limerick now there. I'm back in Limerick now. Subcontracting still, not running my own outfit. I wound that down before all this and I haven't restarted it. Might do eventually, or might not. I'm 63, which in Ireland means you're either slowing down or you've decided you're not going to, and I haven't quite decided yet. Ciara and I have lunch once a week when she's not too busy. She never asked me directly what happened in Thailand, and I never explained it in full. She's smart enough to have understood the shape of it. We don't talk about it. We talk about other things. That's probably the right arrangement. That's so. If you want me to give you one thing to take away from all this, one sentence you can carry with you, especially if you're sitting somewhere watching this at 2 in the morning with money sitting still in your account and a life that stopped moving, here it is. I didn't go there looking for trouble. I went there looking for someone to need me again. That's the thing they don't tell you. It's not about them. It's about the hole in yourself you're trying to fill. And if you're not careful, that hole has a price tag. One practical note, since this is that kind of channel. If you're going to spend money on a woman in Thailand, and plenty of men do, and some of those relationships are real, and I'm not here to tell you they're not, know what you're spending and why. Don't call it an investment unless you're prepared for the investment to belong entirely to someone else, because that's where it ends up. Every time. That's Brendan's story. And what strikes me, having listened to him tell it, is how hard it is to be properly angry on his behalf. There's no clean villain here on his behalf. Nak wasn't a monster running a calculated con. She was a woman in a difficult situation doing what people in difficult situations do, which is manage multiple things at once and not always be honest about it. The family's poverty was real. The mother's illness was real, the house is real, and someone's father is growing vegetables in the yard of it right now. But Brendan lost 32,000. And more than that, he lost a version of himself he'd been holding on to since the Tuesday his daughter rang him, the version that was useful, that fixed things, that mattered to someone. He went looking for that feeling and found something that approximated it well enough to last 7 months, which is both a long time and no time at all. He's all right now, not fixed, not destroyed. All right. Which, for a man like Brendan, quiet, capable, not given to drama, is probably as close to fine as it gets. This is Thailand. We'll see you next time. Go in with your eyes open.